A retired Marine walked his dog through a blizzard on a Tuesday night and thought the worst thing that could happen was frostbite. He was wrong. An old woman came out of the dark, barely breathing, grabbing his sleeve with both hands. Her husband had collapsed. She needed help now. But when Ethan Cross stepped inside that cabin and knelt beside the dying man on the floor, it wasn't the medical emergency that stopped him cold. It was the porch light, and the 7 words the old man kept whispering through cracked lips. The light stays on. He might come back. If you're new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because the stories on this channel will find you at 2 a.m. and refuse to let you sleep. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go. The snow started at 8:30 and didn't ask permission. By 9:15, it was coming sideways off the lake, the kind of wet, angry snow that soaked through a jacket in under 4 minutes and turned every footpath in Pine Hollow into a skating rink. Most sensible people in town were already behind locked doors with the heat cranked up and something warm in a mug. Pine Hollow was that kind of place. Population 4,000, maybe 4,200 if you counted the seasonal cabins on the East Ridge, tucked hard against the shore of Lake Carver in the northeast corner of the state. The sort of small town that existed mostly to remind people that the world was quieter than they remembered. Ethan Cross was not behind a locked door. He was moving through Liberty Memorial Park at a steady clip, collar turned up, breath coming in short white bursts, shadow working the path ahead of him on a loose 6-foot lead. The German Shepherd was 11 years old and carried it the way a retired sergeant carries a bad knee, with full knowledge of the damage and zero intention of slowing down. Shadow had served 3 combat deployments with the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion before a fragment off an IED in Helmand Province shredded the cartilage in his left hip. The Corps had done right by him, eventually. So had Ethan. They'd been together for 9 years. Shadow knew Ethan's breathing patterns better than any doctor ever had. The park was empty. The memorial at the center of it, a black granite slab listing the names of Pine Hollow's war dead going back to Korea, had accumulated an inch of snow on its flat upper edge. Ethan passed it without breaking stride. He'd read every name on that wall 6 weeks after moving here. Twice. It was the kind of thing you did. He was a gunnery sergeant, retired. 13 years in force recon, the last 4 folded into special operations work that didn't get written down in ways family members could read. 2 Purple Hearts he'd never framed. A shoulder that predicted rain better than the local meteorologist. He was 39 years old, and he'd come to Pine Hollow because a friend of a friend had mentioned the fishing was good, the rent was low, and nobody would ask him what his ribbon rack meant. All 3 things had turned out to be true. Shadow stopped. It was a sudden, definitive stop. The kind that came with both ears rotating forward and the dog's body dropping fractionally at the shoulders, weight redistributed, nose lifted. Ethan halted behind him on instinct, his hand finding the lead without looking, his own senses cycling up automatically the way 13 years of field work had hardwired them to do. Movement. 30 yards, 10 o'clock. Someone coming through the trees from the direction of the east path. Unsteady gait. Arms out for balance, moving too fast for the conditions. Ethan's free hand dropped to his side, fingers loose. She came out of the tree line and nearly went down on the icy path before he closed the distance. Elderly woman, mid-70s at least, wearing a heavy wool coat over what looked like a nightgown. Rubber-soled house slippers completely wrong for this weather. No hat, no gloves. Snow already building up on her white hair and her shoulders like she'd been out here longer than made any sense. Her face was the thing that made him move faster. Pure terror. Not fear. Terror. The specific face of someone who had just watched something they couldn't process. Hey. He caught her arm before she could go down. Hey, I've got you. Stand still. She grabbed his sleeve with both hands and squeezed. My husband. Her voice was paper thin. He fell. He's on the floor and I can't. She stopped, breathed. Tried again. I called 911, but they said 8 minutes, and he's not responding, and I don't know how to, where? The cabin. Birchwood Lane. It's just, she turned and pointed back the way she'd come. 15 minutes, maybe. I walked 4 minutes at a run. Ethan looked at Shadow, who was already watching him. Show me. He pulled his phone with his free hand as they moved, called it in again on top of her 911, gave his name and prior service out of habit. It opened doors at dispatch, got things moving, and then pocketed the phone and focused on keeping Helen Mercer upright and moving in the right direction. She talked as they went, words coming in pieces between labored breaths. Her husband had been unwell for weeks. He'd been a veteran, Army, 2 tours in Vietnam, and his health had been sliding in the way health slides when a man in his mid-70s decides that doctors are people who tell you things you don't want to hear, so you stop going. He'd been on the floor when she came downstairs at 9. She'd tried CPR the way she'd seen it done on television, which was not quite the same as knowing how to do it, and then she'd run, barefoot practically, in a Montana blizzard. She'd run. Ethan filed that away somewhere between respect and grief and kept moving. Birchwood Lane was a gravel track off the east side of the park, barely wide enough for one vehicle, lined with old-growth birch on both sides that turned the whole corridor into a tunnel. 3 properties sat along it. The Mercer cabin was the last one, set back from the lane by 50 yards of open yard that the wind had turned into a drift field. The porch light was on. A single yellow bulb in a fixture above the front door, burning hard against the storm. Ethan noted it, cataloged it, moved past it. Front door was unlocked. Helen had left it open when she ran. Shadow went in first, the dog's training kicking in even in retirement, and Ethan followed. Walter Mercer was on the kitchen floor, 3 feet from the table, on his back, late 70s. Big man once. You could still see the frame of him, wide shoulders, thick wrists, but the kind of big that had quietly evacuated over the course of years, leaving the architecture without the mass. He was in pajamas and wool socks, and one of them had a hole in the heel. His color was wrong. Ethan was on his knees beside the man before Helen had cleared the doorway. Pulse. Weak, irregular, present. Breathing. Shallow, not stopped. He was unconscious, but he was alive, and the pattern suggested cardiac rather than stroke. Though Ethan was not a medic and he knew the limits of field assessment, he checked the airway, positioned the man's head, looked for obvious injury from the fall. Nothing immediately catastrophic. He stripped off his own jacket and laid it over the man's chest. Shadow sat in the doorway to the hall and watched. He's breathing, Ethan said without turning around. Heart's beating. He's not gone, okay? You hear me? Helen made a sound behind him that wasn't quite a word. What's his name? Walter? Walter? Ethan put his hand on the old man's shoulder. Walter, can you hear me? Paramedics are coming. You're going to be all right. Walter Mercer's eyelids moved, not fully open. A flutter, the kind that came from somewhere deep, someone trying to surface through dark water. His lips moved first. Ethan leaned in. The old man's voice was almost inaudible beneath the sound of the wind against the windows, the creak of the old cabin's frame in the gust. Ethan had to get his ear within 6 inches of the man's mouth to hear it. Light. What? The light. A breath, a long pause. Don't turn it off. Ethan straightened slightly and looked back toward the front door, where that yellow porch light was throwing a pale coin of warmth onto the snow. He looked at Helen. She was standing with her arms wrapped around herself, watching her husband on the floor, and whatever was in her face when she caught Ethan's eye, it wasn't confusion. She knew exactly what Walter meant. She'd known for a long time, and the knowing of it was something that had settled into her features and stayed there, the way grief does when it's been lived with long enough to become furniture. How long has that light been on? Ethan asked quietly. Helen looked away. 7 years, she said. He turns it on at dusk, every night. 7 years. She didn't explain it. She just stood there in her wet nightgown in her own kitchen, arms around herself, snow melting out of her hair, while outside the sirens finally started coming up Birchwood Lane. The paramedics were good. 2 of them, young, efficient, moving with the practiced calm of people who had responded to enough calls in enough weather to have stopped performing urgency and started delivering it. They had Walter Mercer on a gurney and out the front door in 11 minutes, which was fast work in a tight kitchen. Ethan stood back and let them do it. Shadow sat beside him, close enough that his flank pressed against Ethan's leg, which was what the dog did when he thought Ethan needed company and wasn't going to ask for it. Helen rode in the ambulance. Before they loaded her up, she gripped Ethan's hand at the door. "The door's unlocked," she said. I didn't get a chance to—" "I'll lock it," he said. She nodded. "And the light." She looked at the porch fixture, then back at him. "Leave the light on, please." He said he would. Then she was gone, and Birchwood Lane was quiet again, except for the storm, and Ethan Cross stood on the porch of a stranger's cabin with a retired military dog pressing against his knee, staring at a yellow porch light burning in the middle of a blizzard. He stayed there longer than he needed to. He'd intended to lock the door and go home. That was the plan. Instead, he ended up inside the cabin because Shadow had gone in without being asked, and Ethan had followed to retrieve him and then stopped in the front room and stood there looking at it. The cabin was old but maintained, not immaculate. There were dishes in the drying rack and a layer of dust on the bookshelves and a crack in the plaster above the fireplace that nobody had gotten around to patching. But maintained, cared for, the way a place is when people love it without necessarily having the energy or the money to make it perfect. The furniture was worn in the way furniture gets worn when it's used every day for 40 years. There was a quilt on the couch that had been repaired in 3 places with thread that didn't quite match the original pattern. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, 2 photographs. Ethan was not in the habit of examining strangers' photographs, but these were at eye level, and he had nowhere else to put his eyes. The first one was a wedding photo. Walter and Helen, younger by 40 years, standing outside a church in summer. Walter in dress uniform. Army. Tall, straight, the look of a man who had not yet discovered what the uniform actually meant in practice. The second photograph was of a younger man, late 20s, maybe 30, also in uniform. Different era, different branch. Marine Corps. Dress blues, the same serious expression that people get when a photographer tells them to hold still and they don't know what to do with their face. Dark eyes. Strong jaw. Built like Walter had been built. The same architecture. Under the frame, someone had placed a small folded note. Ethan didn't touch it. He looked at the photograph for a moment. Then he looked at the porch light, visible through the front window, burning gold in the dark. "Don't turn it off." Shadow was sitting in front of the fireplace, looking at Ethan with the expression that meant he'd already figured something out and was waiting for Ethan to catch up. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I know." He locked the door on his way out, left the light burning, walked home through the blizzard with Shadow at his side and the old man's words looping in the back of his skull like a frequency he couldn't tune out. At the hospital the following morning, Walter Mercer was stable. Cardiac event. The ER team called it a moderate MI, caught early enough, managed with intervention and medication, and the kind of aggressive monitoring that annoyed the patient and reassured everyone else. He was awake, uncomfortable, not thrilled about the monitoring equipment attached to various parts of him. Ethan showed up because Helen had called the number he'd given her and asked if he could come. She'd sounded tired in the specific way that people sound after a night of not sleeping in a hospital waiting room, which is a different tired than any other kind. He brought coffee. She met him in the corridor outside Walter's room, took the coffee with both hands, and didn't say anything for a long moment. "He keeps asking about the light," she finally said. "I left it on." She nodded, drank. "He's been asking about it for 7 years," she said. "Every night before bed. Every morning when he wakes up. It's the first thing." Ethan waited. "Our son," she said. "Ryan. He served. Marines." She paused, and the word Marines landed with a kind of weight that she'd clearly had a long time to develop. "He came home from his second deployment not quite himself, which we understood, or we thought we did." She looked at her coffee cup. "Walter especially. He thought he understood." "Vietnam," Ethan said. 2 tours." She looked up. "He thought he knew what Ryan was carrying. He thought he could—" She stopped, started again. He thought the right response was what had worked for him. Structure, discipline, getting back on your feet, not letting it— He used to say, "Don't let it get its hooks in you." Ethan said nothing. "Ryan couldn't explain what was wrong," Helen said. "He didn't have the words. Or maybe he had the words, and he knew Walter would hear something different in them. They fought. Not violently, never that, but badly. The kind of fighting that happens when two people love each other and neither one of them knows how to say the right thing, and they're both exhausted and scared and angry. She paused. Ryan left one night after a particularly bad argument. He said he'd come back when he was ready. And he didn't. He didn't. Her voice was level. She had clearly told this story to herself so many times that the external telling of it had become manageable. We reported him missing. The police looked. There wasn't much to find, an adult, no evidence of foul play. He'd made a choice to go. She set her coffee down on the window ledge. Walter blamed himself. He still does. He turned the porch light on the first night Ryan was gone, and he hasn't turned it off since. Ethan looked out the corridor window at the parking lot, snow-covered and gray in the morning light. "Do you believe he's still alive?" he asked. Helen Mercer was quiet for long enough that it became its own answer. "I bring 2 sandwiches to the park every evening," she said. "I sit on the bench by the memorial. I eat one. The other one, I leave it." She folded her hands around her coffee cup. "I know it doesn't make sense." "It makes sense," Ethan said. She looked at him. "You're telling him where you are," Ethan said, "in case he comes looking." She held his gaze. Something moved across her face. The specific expression of someone who has said something to themselves in private for years and is hearing it confirmed out loud for the first time. "Nobody's ever put it that way," she said. "Most people haven't done it," he said. She was quiet a moment, then, "Do you have people? Someone you would—" "No," Ethan said. "Not in the way you mean. It wasn't self-pity. It was just a fact. He'd been away most of his adult life. The relationships that existed before the Corps had been slowly replaced by the kind that existed within it, bonds that were deep and real, and often ended suddenly and badly. The people he would have left a light on for were mostly names on walls now. He thought of the memorial in the park, the inch of snow on the flat granite edge. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. Helen looked at him. Ryan's last known address, wherever he stayed when he first came back, friends he had in the area, any routine he kept. "Do you have any of that?" She went very still. "I retired with some skills," Ethan said carefully, "that might be useful in finding a person who doesn't particularly want to be found. I'm not a private investigator. I'm not law enforcement. I'm just someone who—" He stopped, started again. "I know what it looks like when a veteran falls through the cracks. I've seen it. More times than I want to say. Sometimes all it takes is one person who speaks the language." Helen stared at him. "You'd do that?" she said. "You don't even know us." Ethan picked up his own coffee. "I knew that porch light," he said. "That's enough." She searched his face for a long moment, long enough that he understood she was checking for the thing people do when they offer too much too easily, the slight performance of generosity that unravels under scrutiny. She didn't find it, apparently, because she slowly nodded. "I'll write down everything I can remember," she said. "Good." He finished the coffee. "And Helen, don't tell Walter yet." She frowned. "Why not?" Ethan thought of the old man on the kitchen floor, whispering about the light. "Because hope that doesn't deliver is worse than no hope," he said. "Let me find something first." She looked at him for another moment, then she went to find something to write on. Down the hall, behind the closed door of room 14, the monitors kept their quiet rhythm over Walter Mercer's chest, and somewhere in the hospital's fluorescent stillness, the old veteran was doing what he had done every night for 7 years, waiting for a light to mean something. Ethan Cross walked back down the corridor, Shadow's tags jingling softly from the bag he'd carried the dog's paperwork in. Service animal certification, still valid, still open doors, and tried to remember the last time he'd gone looking for something that wasn't a target. He pulled out Helen's list before he'd even reached the parking lot. 13 names, 2 addresses. One description of a truck Ryan had been driving when he disappeared. A 1998 Ford F-150, dark blue, Montana plates, probably expired. It wasn't much. Ethan had found people with less. The snow had stopped sometime overnight, and the morning was cold and white and very still, and above the hospital entrance, a light burned in the pale gray air. He didn't look at it. He was already thinking. 13 names, 2 addresses, 1 truck description from 7 years ago. Ethan sat with the list in the front seat of his truck in the hospital parking lot and read it 3 times, the engine running for heat, shadows stretched across the back seat with his chin on the armrest. The handwriting was Helen's. Small, careful, the kind of handwriting that belonged to a generation that had been taught penmanship as though it mattered and had never quite let go of that belief. Some of the names had phone numbers beside them. Others had small notations. Ryan's friend from high school. Moved away, I think, or army buddy. Don't know if they're still in touch. Or simply a question mark. The 2 addresses were more useful. One was a rental property on the south end of town where Ryan had briefly stayed after coming home. A studio apartment above a hardware store on Clement Street. The kind of place a man rents when he doesn't want to be at home, but also doesn't want to admit that. The other address was a Veterans Outreach Center 40 minutes east in the larger town of Caldwell, where Helen believed Ryan had gone once or twice looking for, she'd written this part carefully, something, I'm not sure what. He didn't say. Ethan folded the list and put it in his jacket pocket. He knew that shape of searching. You went somewhere looking for a word you didn't have yet. Sometimes the word was help. Sometimes it was explanation. Sometimes it was just someone who would look at you without the particular expression that people who loved you wore. That fragile, frightened, please be okay expression that was its own kind of pressure, its own demand, even when it wasn't meant to be. He pulled out of the parking lot at 9:30. The apartment above the hardware store was occupied now by a young woman with a toddler on her hip who told Ethan through a 3-inch gap in the door that she'd been there 2 years and didn't know anything about previous tenants. She was polite about it. The toddler stared at Ethan with the absolute unguarded assessment that children deploy before they learn to pretend they're not looking. Ethan thanked her and went downstairs. The hardware store owner was a man named Gus Pelletier, somewhere in his 60s, with the kind of face that had been weathered into a permanent expression of mild skepticism. He remembered the apartment upstairs. He remembered a tenant named Ryan. Quiet kid, paid on time, kept weird hours. But he'd moved out, Gus said, without particular drama. Just stopped being there one day. Left the key on the kitchen counter with 2 weeks' rent in cash and a note that said sorry for the short notice. Did he say where he was going? Ethan asked. Gus shook his head. Didn't say much about anything, that one. Not unfriendly, you understand, just kept to himself. He paused, frowning at a display of pipe fittings like they'd reminded him of something. He had a dog for a while, big one. Brought it back from somewhere. I'm not supposed to allow animals, but... He shrugged. Seemed like the dog was doing him more good than the rules were doing me. Ethan looked at Shadow, who was sitting by the door with his leash wrapped around Ethan's wrist. What happened to the dog? Ethan asked. Gus's expression shifted slightly. Not much, just enough. Don't know, he said, and turned back to his pipe fittings in the way people turn away from a subject they've decided is finished. Ethan thanked him and left. The Veterans Outreach Center in Caldwell operated out of a converted 2-story building on the west end of Main Street that had previously been a dental office and still had the faint antiseptic smell that those buildings never fully lost. Inside, it was warmer than it had any right to be, the kind of institutional warmth that came from old radiators running at full capacity. And the front room had been arranged with folding chairs and round tables, and a coffee station that looked like it had been in continuous operation since at least 2009. 3 men sat at separate tables when Ethan came in. None of them looked up. The woman at the front desk was in her 40s, compact, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the focused, slightly embattled energy of someone managing too many things on too little funding. Her name tag said Diane. Help you? She said. I'm looking for information on a veteran who may have used your services a few years back, Ethan said. Ryan Mercer, Marine, would have come in sometime between 6 and 8 years ago. Diane looked at him over her glasses. We don't share client information. Understood. I'm not asking for records. He kept his voice level, unhurried. His father's in the hospital in Pine Hollow, cardiac event. His mother is trying to locate him. I'm helping. Are you law enforcement? No. PI? No, just someone with a skill set. He let that sit. I'm not trying to drag him anywhere. His parents are elderly and his father is not well. His mother would like to know if her son is alive. Diane studied him for a moment with the practiced evaluation of someone who had heard a great many people describe their own motivations in flattering terms. "I can tell you he came in," she said finally. "That much is... We have a sign-in log, not confidential, just a head count record. He signed in 4 times over about 3 months, then stopped." "Did he speak with anyone here? A counselor, a peer support, Mr. Cross?" "Mr. Cross. I understand what you're trying to do, and I genuinely hope you find him. But what I can tell you is that a lot of veterans come in here once or twice and then don't come back. And the reasons for that are private and complicated and not mine to explain to strangers, however well-intentioned." She held his gaze. "What I can tell you, off the record, is that when someone stops coming here, it usually means one of 2 things. Either they found something better or they stopped looking." Ethan nodded. "Any of the staff here from that time still working here?" "One," she paused. "Pete Hollis. He does peer support Tuesdays and Thursdays. Marine, 2 tours Fallujah. He might remember your guy. He tends to remember the ones who don't come back." She looked at her desk calendar. "Today's Wednesday." "I'll be here Thursday," Ethan said. He was halfway to the door when she spoke again. "Mr. Cross?" He turned. "The ones who stop coming, sometimes they're just not ready yet. Doesn't mean they're gone. Just means the door hasn't opened the right way." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm looking." He spent the rest of Wednesday working through the list. 4 of the names were dead ends. Disconnected numbers, wrong addresses, 1 forwarding address in Oregon that didn't answer. 2 were genuinely helpful in the way that old information is helpful, which is to say they confirmed what Ryan had been like rather than where he was now. A high school friend named Danny Orr, reached by phone in Missoula, said Ryan had texted him once about a year after disappearing. Just a photograph, no message, of somewhere that looked like forest with snow on the ground. Danny had replied and never heard back. He still had the photograph. Ethan asked him to send it. It came through 20 minutes later. Trees, snow. The edge of what looked like a structure. A roof line, corrugated metal, just visible in the lower right corner. The image metadata had been stripped, which meant Ryan had either done it intentionally or the phone had defaulted to privacy settings. The trees were conifer, spruce or lodgepole pine, common to half the county. The snow depth suggested higher elevation. Not much, but it was something that hadn't existed before. He drove back to Pine Hollow in the early afternoon and checked on Shadow, who had waited in the truck without complaint, as was his character, and then walked to Liberty Memorial Park and stood at the bench nearest the granite memorial wall and looked at it. Helen's bench. He knew it was Helen's bench because there was a particular smoothness to the wood on the right side, worn down by years of the same person sitting in the same position, and because someone had left 2 paper coffee cups on the armrest, one of which had a faint lipstick mark on the rim. He sat down on the left side. The park was empty at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday in winter. The snow from 2 nights ago had been packed down on the main path by foot traffic and was starting to gray at the edges. A crow was doing something systematic to what appeared to be a granola bar wrapper near the base of the memorial. Ethan sat there for a while and did what soldiers learn to do in the spaces between operations. Not quite thinking, not quite not thinking. Letting the information settle into pattern without forcing it. Ryan Mercer. 36 years old, if Ethan had done the math right from Helen's description. Marine. 2 deployments. The second one had done something to him, which was the way it sometimes went. Not always the first deployment, or the worst one, or the one with the most contact. Sometimes it was the second one, or the third, because by then you'd used up a certain reserve that you didn't know you had, and the thing you'd been running on was gone, and the thing underneath it was harder to look at. He'd come home carrying it. He'd tried the apartment, the outreach center, 4 visits that hadn't been enough, or hadn't been the right kind of enough. He'd had a dog for a while, and then he hadn't. He'd texted a photograph of trees and snow and a roof line, and then he'd gone very quiet for a very long time. But he hadn't, as far as Ethan could determine, left the area. That was the thing. The photo Danny had sent was local looking. And there was something in the pattern of it. The watching, the proximity, the fact of someone who was hiding, but not hiding far, that felt like a particular shape Ethan had seen before. A man in cover, not retreat. Cover. There was a difference, and it mattered. Thursday came cold and clear. The sky, the sharp, deep blue of winter mornings when all the moisture has been pressed out of the air by the cold. Ethan left Shadow at home. The dog's hip was stiff in this kind of weather, and there was no operational need, and drove to Caldwell. Pete Hollis was at the outreach center when Ethan arrived at 9. He was a large man, early 50s, gone heavy in the torso the way some big men do when the physical structure of their life changes and the calories don't. He had a marine tattoo on his left forearm, not the dress blues eagle globe and anchor that civilians got, but the small, ugly version that got put on in country by someone with a needle and a grudge. And he shook Ethan's hand with the automatic grip and release of a man who had shaken a lot of hands and classified them all within the first second. He recognized Ethan's grip for what it was. "Gunny?" he said, reading something. "Was," Ethan said. "Force recon." Pete nodded once, the minimal acknowledgement of one tribe member to another. He poured himself coffee, offered the same to Ethan, and sat down at one of the round tables without any particular ceremony. "Ryan Mercer," Pete said when Ethan had laid it out. He said the name the way you say the name of someone you've thought about since. "Yeah, I remember him." "What do you remember?" Pete wrapped both hands around his mug. "Quiet. Too quiet. The way some of them get, not shut down quiet. That's different. That's flat effect. You can spot it. His was more like watchful." He paused. He'd come in and sit and listen to the group sessions without saying much, and I used to watch him and think, this one's processing something he doesn't have language for yet. "Did you talk to him one-on-one?" "Twice." Pete set his mug down. "The second time was the last time I saw him. He came in agitated, not angry, but," he looked for the word, "like a man who'd made a decision and wasn't sure if it was the right one but was going to do it anyway. He told me he'd had a bad fight with his father, that he couldn't make his father understand, and he couldn't keep trying because every time he tried, it made it worse." Ethan waited. "I told him to give it time," Pete said. "I told him the relationship wasn't going anywhere, that his father wasn't going anywhere, and that sometimes you have to create some distance before you can find the right angle to come back in from." He was quiet for a moment. "I still think that was the right advice. I just think Ryan, he took the distance part too literally, or too far, or maybe," he stopped. "Maybe nobody ever told him what coming back was supposed to look like, practically speaking, so he just stayed in the distance." "Do you know where he went?" "Not specifically. He mentioned a place, the way you mention something casually, not like it's important, which is usually when something is important. A property out past the ridge east of town. Said a buddy from his second deployment had a piece of land out there, a trailer on it, that nobody was using. Said it was just temporary." "Do you remember the buddy's name?" Pete thought. "First name only. Weston, maybe. Wes, I can't. It was 7 years ago." He looked at Ethan steadily. "You think he's still out there?" "I think he's still somewhere close," Ethan said. "That's what the evidence suggests." "Why hasn't he gone home?" Ethan picked up his own coffee. "Same reason people stay in cover even when the threat's neutralized," he said. "Because coming out feels more dangerous than staying in. Because you've been down long enough that standing up has started to seem like a choice someone else makes." Pete looked at him for a long moment. "His father's sick," Pete said. It wasn't a question. "In the hospital, cardiac." Pete sat back. "Damn. Yeah. You tell the mother you'd find him?" "I told her I'd look." "That's not the same thing." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not." Wait. He spent the afternoon on county property records, which were partially digitized and partially in filing cabinets at the county assessor's office in Caldwell, staffed by a woman named Terry, who was deeply uninterested in being helpful and deeply interested in her lunch, which was a large sub sandwich she was eating at her desk at 11:30 in the morning with the focused commitment of someone who had rescheduled this sandwich twice already. Ethan did not push. He waited. He asked politely. He explained what he needed and why, which was that he was looking for a parcel of land east of Pine Hollow, likely owned by or registered to someone with the last name Weston, possibly accessed via a fire road or logging track, with a trailer or mobile structure on it. Terry found 3 parcels matching that general description. One was a Weston, first named Gerald, who had bought 40 acres east of the ridge in 2004 and hadn't sold it since, according to the records. No primary structure listed. Tax payments up to date, which meant either Gerald Weston was alive and paying or the payments were set to auto. Ethan thanked her. She told him to have a good day in a tone that suggested she was using the phrase as a door. He sat in his truck outside the assessor's office and pulled up what digital mapping he could on his phone. Gerald Weston's parcel was accessible, technically, by a Forest Service road that branched off Route 14 about 6 miles east of the Pine Hollow town limit and climbed maybe 2 miles into the ridge before it ran out of designation on the map. Whether the road itself was currently passable was a different question, and one that the map couldn't answer. He had the location. He needed to move carefully. If Ryan Mercer was out there, showing up unannounced with the wrong energy would close the door before it opened. This was not a target. This was a person who had made a series of choices that had compounded on each other over 7 years, and who had reasons for each of those choices that Ethan wasn't arrogant enough to dismiss just because he couldn't fully see them from the outside. He drove back to Pine Hollow. Helen was at the park bench at 4:30, which Ethan knew because Shadow had needed the walk and he'd come through the park without particular intention and found her there. 2 sandwiches in a paper bag, coffee in a thermos. The bench was hers, the way a pew becomes yours when you've sat in it long enough. He sat down beside her. She looked at him, and something in his face must have told her something because she straightened slightly. "You found something," she said. "Maybe," he said. "I don't want to, Don't manage me," she said quietly, but with an edge. "I've been managed very gently by very well-meaning people for 7 years. Walter's doctors manage me. The police managed me. My sister manages me every Sunday on the phone. I'm 73 years old, Mr. Cross. I would like someone to just tell me the thing." Ethan looked at her. "I have a possible location," he said. "East of town, up in the ridge. A piece of property belonging to a friend of Ryan's from his second deployment. I haven't confirmed he's there. I could be wrong." Helen set both her hands flat on her thighs. "But you think he's there?" "I think he's somewhere close. The pattern fits, well, someone who hasn't gone far but who also hasn't come back. Someone who's been maintaining distance without breaking contact entirely." He paused. "The photograph he sent his friend Danny. The fact that he's never once been picked up in another state, no records anywhere further afield. You checked?" "I have access to some databases." He left it at that. "Nothing official, just I can look in places that aren't the standard search." Helen was quiet. She reached into the paper bag, took out one of the sandwiches, and placed the second one carefully on the bench armrest beside her, the way you'd set a place at a table. "He loved this park," she said. "He and Walter used to come here in the evenings when Ryan was young. Walter would quiz him on military history. Ryan would get everything wrong on purpose to make Walter explain it again, because he liked hearing his father talk." She smoothed the wax paper over the sandwich. "Walter used to get so frustrated. He'd say, 'Ryan, I know you know this.' And Ryan would say, 'I just like the story better when you tell it.'" The crow was back, working the same patch near the memorial wall. "His father never told him the story the right way," Helen said. "When Ryan came home, he knew something was wrong. Walter did. He knew. But the only story he knew how to tell about that was the one where you push through it, where you hold the line, where weakness is a temporary condition that discipline corrects." She paused. "He wasn't wrong, exactly. That story had worked for him. He didn't understand that Ryan was carrying a different weight than he'd carried, or maybe the same weight in a different shape, and the technique that works for one shape doesn't always work for another." "Ryan couldn't tell him that," Ethan said. "Ryan barely knew it himself." She picked up her sandwich and held it without eating it. He'd come to the dinner table and Walter would say, "How are you doing?" And Ryan would say, "Fine." And Walter would say, "Good. That's what I want to hear." And Ryan would, "Just." She made a small gesture with one hand. "Fold, a little, every time." Ethan understood that particular geometry very well. "When are you going up to the ridge?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning, if the road's passable." "I want to come." "Helen, I know." She put the sandwich down. "I know why you're going to say no. He's made a choice to stay away, and showing up with his mother is—" She stopped. "I know. I won't." She said it in the voice of someone making a promise that cost something. "But I want you to— when you find him." She stopped. Started again. "If you find him, don't tell him his father is dying. Don't use that." She looked at Ethan directly. "I know it might work. I know it might be the thing that gets him to move. But I don't want Ryan to come home because he's afraid of losing something. I want him to come home because he knows he still has something." Ethan sat with that for a moment. "That's a harder ask," he said. "I know." She finally picked up her sandwich again. "Everything worth doing is—" She took a bite, set it down, looked at the second sandwich on the armrest. Ethan watched her and said nothing because there wasn't anything to say that would be better than the silence. He was up before 6 on Friday, shadow-fed and medicated, and settled on the kitchen rug with a rawhide that would occupy him for several hours. Ethan loaded the truck with the things a person loads when they're going off-road in winter in the mountains. Chains for the tires, a come-along strap, water, a first aid kit that went well beyond what the average citizen carried, and a thermos of coffee. He dressed in layers. He did not bring a firearm, which was a deliberate choice rather than an oversight. He was not going armed into a situation involving a fragile person in a fragile state. He'd seen what that particular math could do. Route 14 East was clear, the highway department having run a plow through some time in the night. The turnoff for the Forest Service road was easy to miss. A break in the tree line, no sign, just twin ruts in the snow angled upward between lodgepole pines. Ethan turned in and dropped into four-wheel drive. The road climbed. The trees thickened. The ruts were old but not unused. There were tire tracks in the snow, partially filled by the last snowfall but still visible, the width and spacing suggesting a full-size pickup. Someone had been up and down this road in the last couple of weeks. He drove 2 miles by the odometer, moving slowly, until the road opened into a small clearing at the edge of a creek that was half frozen and moving sluggishly under a skin of ice. There was a trailer. It was a 30-foot travel trailer, probably 20 years old, parked with its nose pointed west and its side angled to take advantage of the tree line as a windbreak. Someone had done real work on it. There was weather stripping around the door, a piece of heavy canvas rigged as an awning over the propane tank, a cord of firewood stacked and covered against the exterior wall, a small generator dormant, tire tracks around the clearing showing the pattern of regular use, and parked beside the trailer, pointing outward the way you'd park a vehicle if you might need to leave quickly, a dark blue 1998 Ford F-150 with Montana plates. Ethan stopped the truck at the edge of the clearing and sat for a moment without moving. The trailer door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, lean in the way of someone who ate practically rather than well, wearing a canvas work jacket and heavy boots, and a watchfulness in his posture that was instantly recognizable to anyone who'd ever carried a weapon for a living. Dark eyes, strong jaw. The photograph from the mantelpiece, aged 7 years and set in a harder light. Ryan Mercer looked at Ethan's truck from 20 feet away, and he didn't run, but his whole body made the calculation in the half-second before he decided not to. Ethan got out of the truck slowly, hands visible. "I'm not here to drag you anywhere," he said. Ryan didn't move. "My name is Ethan Cross, Gunnery Sergeant, Force Recon, retired." He let that land. "Your father collapsed 2 nights ago. He's alive and stable. I'm not here to tell you to go see him." He paused. "I'm here because your mother asked me to find out if you were still breathing. Now I know." He held Ryan's gaze. "So, are you?" Ryan stared at him across the clearing. The creek moved under its ice. The trees held their silence. And then Ryan Mercer let out a breath, long, unsteady, the kind of breath that had been held for so long the person holding it had forgotten they were doing it. And he said, You better come inside. The inside of the trailer was warmer than it had any right to be. A small propane heater in the corner was doing serious work, and whoever had insulated the walls, Ryan, presumably, over the course of 7 winters, had done it thoroughly, layering reflective foam board behind the original paneling in the sections where the cold came through hardest. The result was a space that felt compressed and deliberately arranged, every object with a purpose and a place. A cot with military corners on the blanket, a camp stove on the counter beside a row of canned goods organized by category, a water filtration setup above the small sink, a shelf with maybe 20 paperbacks, spines cracked from multiple readings. No photographs. Ryan set a second mug of coffee on the small table and sat across from Ethan and didn't say anything for a while. He held his own mug in both hands and looked at the surface of the coffee the way you look at something when you're not actually seeing it, when you're running an internal calculation that the external world is just background noise for. Ethan waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the more transferable skills. "How'd you find me?" Ryan finally said. "Pete Hollis mentioned a property east of the ridge. County records gave me a parcel registered to a Gerald Weston. Tire tracks on the road told me the rest." Ryan looked up. "Pete talked to you." "Pete wants you alive. That's not talking out of school. That's keeping score." Ryan looked back at his coffee. "How's my father?" It wasn't a question, quite. It had the shape of one, but not the weight. Like a man asking about weather he'd already checked. "Stable," Ethan said. "Moderate cardiac event. They've got him monitored. He's not happy about it." A sound from Ryan that might have been the edge of a laugh, and then wasn't. "No, he wouldn't be." He asked about the porch light. Ryan's jaw tightened. He set his mug down. "From the hospital bed," Ethan said. First thing he was coherent enough to say. The trailer made a small sound in the wind, the frame flexing. Ryan stood up and went to the small window above the sink and stood there with his back to Ethan, looking out at the clearing. The F-150 was visible through the glass, the trees beyond it. "I've driven past that house," Ryan said. "More times than I should have. I know that's—" He stopped. "I know how that sounds." "It doesn't sound like anything," Ethan said. "It sounds like someone who couldn't leave and couldn't come back." "I wanted to." He said it to the window. "I used to get all the way to the end of Birchwood Lane. Sometimes I'd sit there for an hour." "What stopped you?" Ryan turned around. The look on his face was not self-pity. It was more honest than that, and more complicated. The look of someone who had examined a question for so long that they'd worn a groove in it and still didn't have the answer at the bottom. "I didn't know what I'd do if I walked in and my father looked at me the same way he looked at me the night I left," Ryan said. "Like I was something that just needed more discipline. Like whatever I was carrying was a failure of will." He picked up his mug again, looked at it. "I know he doesn't mean it that way. I know that now, more than I did then. But knowing a thing and being able to walk toward it, those aren't the same." Ethan didn't say anything. "What did she tell you?" Ryan asked. "My mother?" "She told me about the sandwiches." Ryan's face moved in a way that was swift and involuntary, and then controlled. He sat back down at the table. "She still does that?" he said. "Every evening." The silence lasted long enough to take up physical space in the trailer. "She told me not to use your father's condition to get you to move," Ethan said. "She wants you to come home because you know you still have something there, not because you're afraid of losing it." Ryan looked at him. "That sounds like her," he said quietly. "It does." Ryan turned his mug in a slow circle on the table, one full rotation, then another, thinking through something in the methodical way of a man who had spent years with only himself to think things through with. "I'm not the person who left," he said. "I know that's... Everyone says that, right? Everyone who's been through something comes out the other side saying, 'I'm different now.' But I mean it in the specific sense. The person who walked out of that house 7 years ago was someone who was about 3 weeks from a very bad decision. I didn't know that then. I know it now." He said it flat and direct, without drama, which was the only way that particular thing could be said. 3 weeks, Ethan said. "Give or take." Ryan looked at him without looking away. "I'm not in that place anymore. I want to be clear about that. I worked through it. Not all of it. Not cleanly, but enough. The distance helped. in the ways Pete said it might. It also, he paused. The distance has a gravity of its own after a while. You stop being in it temporarily and start being in it permanently without quite knowing when that line got crossed. 7 years has passed the line, Ethan said. Yeah, Ryan said it without argument. I know. So what are you waiting for? Ryan looked at him steadily. I don't know, he said. And that's the honest answer. I genuinely don't know anymore. Which is maybe... He stopped. Maybe that's the thing I needed someone else to say out loud. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked around the trailer. The canned goods, the water filter, the neatly made cot, the shelf of read and reread paperbacks. A man who had built a sustainable life at the exact distance from everything that mattered to him that allowed him to survive. Not live. Survive. I'm not going to tell you to go today, Ethan said. I'm not going to tell you to go this week. But your father is 70-some years old, and he has a heart condition, and the porch light has been on since 2017. And I think you've known for a while that the window isn't unlimited. Ryan said nothing. I'm going to leave you my number, Ethan said, and took out his phone and wrote it on the margin of the paper bag he'd brought his own coffee in, and left it on the table. When you're ready, not to manage the situation, just so there's a number. He stood up. Ethan. Ryan said it without any particular inflection. Ethan turned. The dog you walked in with when you found my mother. She told me about him, one of the times when I was close enough to the house to see through the kitchen window. He paused. Military working dog? Retired, Ethan said. 11 years old. Hip's bad, but he's got strong opinions about everything. Ryan looked at him. What's his name? Shadow. Something moved across Ryan's face, gone before Ethan could read it fully. Okay, Ryan said. Thanks for the coffee. Ethan drove back down the ridge road and didn't let himself think about the conversation too hard, because the hardest conversations were the ones you could ruin by thinking about them too much afterward. Walter Mercer was upgraded from the ICU to a general cardiac ward on Saturday morning, which was good news dressed in unremarkable clothing. The cardiologist, a young woman named Dr. Anand, who had the particular manner of someone who had learned to deliver complicated information without softening it into uselessness, told Helen that Walter's recovery was progressing, but that the underlying arterial condition warranted medication management going forward and a serious conversation about lifestyle. Walter received this information by asking what was actually wrong with his lifestyle. Helen, who had heard the exchange from the hallway, told Ethan about it that afternoon in the park with the flat delivery of a woman who had been married to Walter Mercer for 51 years and had stopped being surprised by him. He asked if he could still have eggs, she added. Ethan looked at her. Dr. Anand told him to limit them to 3 per week, Helen said. He told her that was enough to work with. They sat for a moment in the thin winter sun, which was doing its limited best on the bench. I found Ryan, Ethan said. Helen's hand stilled in her lap. He's alive, Ethan said. He's okay. He's been out at a property on the East Ridge. He has a trailer, firewood, a truck. He's functional. He paused. He's not in a good place emotionally, but he's not in a dangerous place. He knows what he left behind. He hasn't been able to figure out how to come back to it. Helen sat very still. Did he say... She stopped. He said he knew about the sandwiches, Ethan said quietly. He said that sounds like her when I told him what you'd asked me to tell him. Helen put one hand over her mouth briefly and then took it away. Is he going to come? She asked. I think so, Ethan said. I don't know when, and I want to be honest about that. I can't promise you a timeline or an outcome. What I can tell you is that he's not someone who doesn't want to come home. He's someone who's been in his own way for a long time and might need a little more time to get out of it. Helen nodded, once. Does Walter know? She asked. No. She nodded again and picked up her thermos and poured coffee into the cap and drank it, and looked at the memorial wall with the expression of a woman who had just been told her son was breathing and was doing her level best to receive that as enough for right now. Met. On Sunday evening, Ethan was at home when his phone rang. He checked the screen. Unknown number, but a 406 area code. Montana. Local. He picked up. He's gone. Helen's voice stripped of its usual composure. Walter, Someone told him. I don't know who. Someone on the ward overheard me talking to the nurse about Ryan, or... It doesn't matter. He overheard something. He knows Ryan was found. He knows Ryan is on the ridge, and he... She stopped, drew breath. He disconnected his monitor. He dressed himself. One of the night nurses found his room empty 20 minutes ago. Ethan was already on his feet. Where are you? He said. At the hospital. I drove here when they called. The nurse said he couldn't have been gone more than 30 minutes before... Has anyone called the police? They called. But Mr. Cross, it's snowing again. It started an hour ago. They're saying near zero visibility by midnight, and it's already... Ethan looked at his window. Snow, hard and coming sideways off the lake, the same as Tuesday night, the same storm pattern cycling back through. Because this was Montana in February, and February was not interested in anyone's emergency. The park, he said. What? Walter knows where Ryan's been, but he doesn't know the Ridge Road. He doesn't have a vehicle. The hospital is, 12 blocks from the park? He was already moving, pulling on his jacket one-handed, looking for Shadow's lead. If he's on foot and he's heading somewhere he knows, he's going to the park, to the bench. That's where Ryan was supposed to come from. That's where Helen's been leaving the signals. He registered his own thinking out loud and shortened it. I'm going. Call the police and tell them to check the park first, then the East Road if he's not there. Don't let anyone drive up that Ridge Road fast or in a regular vehicle. The ruts are... Just tell them to go slow. He hung up. Shadow was already at the door. Yeah, Ethan said. You too. The snow was bad and getting worse. Ethan moved at a controlled run through streets that had gone from gray wet to white in the time it had taken to leave his house. Shadow, on the lead beside him, matching pace with the kind of focused intensity that the dog reserved for situations his instincts classified as serious. The temperature had dropped 8 degrees in 2 hours. The wind off the lake was coming in at an angle that made the visibility ahead of him effectively a wall of white past 30 yards. A 70-plus-year-old man with a recent cardiac event, in pajamas and whatever shoes he'd put on in a hospital room. In this. Ethan did the math and ran faster. He hit the park entrance on the north side and stopped, scanning. The path lights were on, but doing little against the snow. Liberty Memorial Park was 300 yards across at its widest, the main path making a rough figure 8 around the central memorial wall. The bench, Helen's bench, was on the south arc, maybe 150 yards from where he stood. Shadow lifted his nose. Find, Ethan said quietly. The command was from another context, combat tracking, search operations. The language of utility and purpose that the dog had been trained in a decade ago and had never been given cause to forget. Shadow's ears went flat and then rotated forward, and the dog turned southeast on the path, not running but moving with that low, deliberate extension of stride that meant he had something. Ethan followed. They were 70 yards down the south arc when Shadow broke left off the path onto the open grass, snow already calf-deep off the maintained walkway, and Ethan followed into it. His boots punching through the crust with each step, thighs working hard, wind in his face turning his eyes to slits. Shadow stopped. Walter Mercer was on the ground between 2 birch trees, 8 feet from the path, on his side with his knees drawn up. He was wearing a hospital gown beneath his coat. Someone had gotten him a coat, a nurse probably, and he'd found shoes, canvas slip-ons that were soaked through and doing nothing. And his face was the color of old ash. He was conscious, barely. His eyes were open and he was breathing. Ethan was beside him in the same motion he'd been in before, the kitchen floor of the cabin, the same knees down, check pulse, check airway sequence. Pulse present but wrong, breathing labored, temperature dropping. Walter, he got his face in front of the old man's. Walter, look at me. Walter's eyes found him. Something registered. Ryan, Walter said. His voice was a husk. Not Ryan. Ethan Cross, I'm going to get you up. He was already on his phone calling dispatch, giving location, giving condition, keeping his voice level and factual the way you keep your voice when urgency is the enemy of getting what you need. Keep your eyes on me, Walter. Don't close them. He's up there, Walter said. Faint. My boy's up there and it's cold and I know. Ethan got an arm under the old man's shoulders. I know. I'm going to get you somewhere warm, and then we're going to get Ryan. But you're going to stay awake for me right now. Walter's weight was significant, and he couldn't help much, but he tried. The trying was enough to work with. Ethan got him up to something approaching seated, then shifted his own position to support the man's back against his own chest, and wrapped his jacket around both of them as far as it would go. Inadequate, but better than the snow. His phone was in his hand. He pulled up the number he'd left Ryan on the paper bag margin, which Ryan had never called but which Ethan had put into his phone as a record. He hit call. 3 rings. 4. He was composing the voicemail in his head. Compact, factual, devoid of pressure, because pressure was the wrong approach to a man in Ryan's position, and he knew that. When the line connected. Silence. Then, cross. Ryan had called him back at some point and saved the number. Ethan registered this in the background. Your father's in the park, he said. He walked out of the hospital to find you. He's down, cardiac compromised, hypothermic. Paramedics are en route, but it's going to be 10 minutes in this weather, and I'm with him now. Silence. 1 second. 2. Where in the park? South Arc. Off the main path. Near the double birch. I've got him up. He's conscious. I'm 15 minutes out. The line went dead. Ethan looked down at Walter. The old man's eyes were on him, drifting but present. He's coming, Ethan said. Walter's face changed. Even in this cold, in this light, in this condition, something moved through it, complicated and layered. The face of a man who had been holding one shape for 7 years and felt it beginning, at last, to shift. He's coming? Walter said. He's coming. Walter closed his eyes for a moment. Ethan pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Keep your eyes open, Ethan said. Talk to me. What's the first thing you're going to say to him? Walter opened his eyes. I don't know, he said. Good, Ethan said. Don't plan it. Whatever comes out is probably what needs to come out. The old man made a sound that was almost a laugh. When did you become a therapist? About 11 minutes ago, Ethan said. How are your hands? Can you feel your hands? Cold. Squeeze my arm. Walter squeezed, weak but present. Good, Ethan said. Again. Shadow had positioned himself against Walter's legs without being asked, the dog's body heat negligible but his presence not. He had done this before, in different terrain with different people, and the mechanics of it were the same. Warmth where you could provide it, stillness where you couldn't, presence as the minimum viable form of help. The snow kept coming. Ethan kept his arm under Walter's shoulders and his eyes on the path and listened for the sirens that were still somewhere distant in the white noise of the storm, and he thought about a yellow porch light burning through blizzard after blizzard for 7 years, and what it meant that the man beneath his arm had walked out of a hospital bed in his socks to find the son who had needed finding. He thought about what Ryan had said. I used to get all the way to the end of Birchwood Lane. 2 men circling the same distance from each other for 7 years. The snow was a foot deep off the path, getting deeper. He heard the truck before he saw it. Engine noise, a vehicle moving too fast for conditions on the park access road, headlights cutting a cone of white through the snowfall that swept left, then right, then steadied on the South Arc path. The F-150. Dark blue, engine running hard, Ryan behind the wheel. He'd made it in 11 minutes. The truck stopped at the path's edge. The door opened. Ryan came through the snow toward them at a run, not the careful, calculated movement of someone managing their exposure. A run, full and unguarded, and not thinking about anything except the shape of his father in the dark. He dropped to his knees in the snow. Walter opened his eyes. For a moment, nobody said anything. The wind moved through the birch trees. The snow fell. Somewhere in the middle distance, a siren was getting louder. Ryan's face did something that it probably hadn't done in front of another human being in a very long time. He didn't try to stop it. Dad, he said. Walter lifted one hand, slow, trembling with cold. and put it against the side of his son's face. Ryan's eyes closed. "I didn't mean," Ryan started. "I know," Walter said, barely above a whisper. "I know. I didn't either." 7 years, 2 sentences. Ethan Cross looked away because some things were not his to witness without permission. He looked at Shadow. The dog looked back at him with the calm, liquid attention of an animal that had been to enough places with this man to know when the job was done and when it wasn't. And tonight the question was which one this was. The sirens arrived. The paramedics came through the snow with a stretcher and a bright light and the efficient noise of emergency, and Walter Mercer let himself be moved because his son was holding his hand and not letting go. And Ryan walked beside the stretcher with his head bent and his jaw set and his hand wrapped around his father's in the specific careful grip of someone who has learned what it means to almost not have something. Ethan stood in the snow with Shadow at his side and watched them go. His jacket was soaked. He was cold in the way that takes a hot shower in an hour to fix. Shadow's hip was going to be unhappy about this tomorrow, and they were going to have a conversation about it in the way they had conversations, which was mostly Ethan talking and Shadow listening with the expression of a dog who was going to do whatever he was going to do regardless. A paramedic jogged back to him from the stretcher and asked if he was the one who'd called it in and whether he was injured. He said yes and no and gave his details and then stood aside. Helen's car pulled up to the park entrance. She got out without closing the door and looked across the snow toward where the stretcher was being loaded into the ambulance, and she found Ryan beside it, and her hand went to her chest, a single involuntary press of the palm over her heart. Ryan looked up and saw her. He crossed the distance between them in 10 steps. She met him halfway and put her arms around him, and he bent down into it because he was taller than she was, and because it was the position he'd last been in when he was 17 years old and had gotten off a bus from boot camp, and she'd met him at the station, and he told himself he was too old for this and done it anyway. He held on. She held on. The ambulance didn't wait, its lights going red through the snow as it rolled toward the park entrance, and Ryan pulled back and looked at his mother and said something Ethan couldn't hear, and Helen nodded, and Ryan went to his truck and followed the ambulance out. Helen turned and found Ethan. She walked through the snow to where he was standing and stood in front of him and didn't say anything for a moment. "Thank you," she finally said, simple and complete. Ethan nodded. "Go," he said. "He needs you both there." She went. And Ethan Cross stood in Liberty Memorial Park in a snowstorm with Shadow leaning against his leg, and the park was empty and white and very quiet. And somewhere out on Birchwood Lane a porch light was burning against the dark, doing the only thing it knew how to do. The hot shower took 20 minutes and didn't fully work. Ethan stood under it until the water started cooling and then stood there a little longer anyway, because his shoulder was doing the thing it did in cold weather, and because the particular kind of tired that had settled into him tonight was not the kind that responded to being horizontal. Shadow was on the bathroom mat, which was against the rules, but the rules existed primarily as a framework that both of them understood was negotiable under certain conditions, and tonight qualified. He made food without tasting it, stood at the kitchen window and watched the snow. The porch light on Birchwood Lane was not visible from here, but wrong direction, wrong distance, but he was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound that stops. Not presence, absence, and what absence means. He didn't sleep well. Monday came in gray and quiet, the storm system finally moving east overnight and leaving behind the specific stillness of a town that had been beaten up by weather and was assessing the damage. Ethan drove to the hospital at 8 with Shadow in the back and 2 cups of coffee from the place on Clement Street that opened at 6:30, and did it correctly. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. What he found in the corridor outside room 14 was Ryan Mercer, in yesterday's clothes, sitting in a plastic chair with his elbows on his knees, and a paper cup of vending machine coffee going cold in his hands, and the expression of a man who had not slept and was not bothered by that fact because he'd been doing something more important with the hours. He looked up when Ethan came around the corner. Ethan handed him one of the real coffees without comment. Ryan took it, looked at it, and drank half of it in a single pull. "He slept," Ryan said. 3, maybe 4 hours. He woke up at 5 asking about the light again, and I told him I'd take care of it. Did that settle him? Enough. Ryan turned the cup in his hands. Dr. Anand came by at 6. She's direct. She is. She said the episode in the park didn't do additional damage that they can measure. She also said the phrase additional damage that we can measure in a way that made clear she had opinions about what my father did. She has opinions about most things, Ethan said. She told him his heart is not an argument he can win on willpower alone. Ryan paused. He told her he'd managed 50 years of arguments he shouldn't have been able to win. Something shifted in Ryan's expression. She actually almost smiled. Ethan sat down in the adjacent chair. The corridor was doing its early morning business around them. A nurse with a medication cart, the squeak of soft-soled shoes on linoleum, the distant beep of monitoring equipment that became background noise so fast it was unsettling. "Where's my mother?" Ethan asked. "Home. I made her go at 2. She was keeping herself upright on stubbornness, and I told her he'd be there when she got back." Ryan looked at his coffee. "She went. She trusted me with that." The weight of "she trusted me with that" was audible, and Ryan didn't try to reduce it. "How long were you outside the house?" Ethan asked. "Before last night. The times you drove to the end of Birchwood." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "First time was maybe a month after I left. I sat at the end of the lane for 45 minutes and then drove away." He paused. "It became a thing. I'd do it when the distance got too heavy. Come close enough to see the light, then go back." "Did they ever see you?" "Once." He said it simply. "My mother, maybe 2 years in, I was parked on the lane and she came out to check the mailbox and she looked down the lane, directly at the truck." He stopped. "I don't know if she saw me. I don't know if she knew it was me. She stood there for a long time. Then she went back inside and the porch light went on about an hour before it usually did." Ethan thought about Helen at the mailbox, standing in the cold, looking at a truck at the end of her lane. She'd known. Of course she'd known. She just understood, in the way some people understand without being told, that knowing was different from forcing the moment, and that forcing the moment was exactly the wrong thing to do. "She knew," Ethan said. Ryan stared at his cup for a long time. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think she did." The medication cart went past with its soft squeak. "I need to ask you something," Ryan said. He had the tone of a man who had decided to ask something during the long hours of the night and wasn't backing away from it. "What you found in me, what made you keep looking after you had the list? Most people would have checked the outreach center, gotten nowhere, and called it a dead end. Most people aren't retired force recon trackers with 7 free days and a bad shoulder keeping them off the ice," Ethan said. Ryan looked at him sideways. "That's not the full answer." Ethan looked at the middle distance. The window at the end of the corridor, gray morning light, a parking lot covered in white. "I knew what the pattern meant," he said. "Someone who doesn't go far and doesn't come back. Someone who maintains proximity without contact." He paused. "I've been that person. Not in the same way, not the same reasons, but I've been someone who orbited something without being able to close the distance. I recognized the shape of it." Ryan was quiet. "The dog helped," Ethan added. Gus at the hardware store mentioned Ryan had a dog he'd brought back from somewhere, a working dog that someone had given up or lost. That's a specific kind of person. You don't take a dog like that on unless you're planning to stay somewhere long enough to be responsible for it." He paused. "What happened to the dog?" Ryan was still for a moment. "She died," he said. "Last winter. Hip dysplasia. Same problem your shadow's got. She was 12 years old." He said it flat, without trying to make it small or large. "Her name was Kilo. She'd belonged to a handler in my unit who rotated out and couldn't take her to the apartment he'd rented. I took her because nobody else was going to." He looked down the corridor. "She was better at getting me out of my own head than anything else I tried." "Dogs usually are," Ethan said. "When she went, I had a bad month," Ryan said. "That's when I started driving to the end of Birchwood Lane more often. Like the safety net was gone and I needed to—" He stopped. "Recalibrate, I guess." Ethan nodded. "Is that when you called Pete Hollis?" Ryan shook his head. "Never called Pete. He called me. I don't know how he got my number. I don't know how he knew. I think maybe Danny Orr gave it to him. They know each other from somewhere." He paused. Pete called me in December and said he'd heard I'd had a hard year and asked how I was doing. Not in the professional way. Just the way someone asks who already knows the answer isn't going to be fine. What did you tell him? I told him I was managing. He turned his cup once in his hands. He said managing was the word people used when they meant something worse, and that when I was ready to use a different word, he was around. He paused. He was the first person in 6 years who'd called me. The corridor was quiet for a moment. You've got people who want you back, Ryan, Ethan said. Not gently, just as fact. Pete, Danny, your mother, who apparently spent 2 years standing at a mailbox in the cold hoping you could see her. Your father, who walked out of a hospital bed in his socks. He paused. That's not nothing. I know it's not nothing. So what happens now? Ryan looked at the door to room 14. I stay, he said. However long he needs. He said it like a decision that had already been made sometime in the night and had been sitting quietly waiting for the right moment to be said. And then we figure out what after that looks like. One thing. That's the right order, Ethan said. Ryan looked at him. What about you? Helen said you mentioned a next assignment. Loose, Ethan said. Nothing locked in. What do you do? Exactly. Exactly is a complicated word for it. Ethan considered. I find people sometimes. I do security assessments, logistics consulting for companies operating in difficult environments. I have a skill set from 13 years in positions that don't get described in detail, and there's a market for that kind of skill set in the private sector. He paused. It's not exciting work. It's methodical work, which suits me. You live here now, Pine Hollow? For a while. I'm not sure how long a while is. Ryan looked at him with the evaluative directness of a man who had spent 7 years alone learning to read the difference between what people said and what they meant. You're the same kind of stuck that I was, Ryan said. Just a different shape. Ethan said nothing. Just saying, Ryan said, and finished his coffee. Mom. Walter Mercer's room at 9 in the morning was not a comfortable room, but Walter was making the best of it, which looked like sitting up in bed with the television off and a stack of magazines on the tray table that he was clearly not reading. He had color back in his face, which made him look more like himself and less like a warning. He was wearing a hospital gown and a wool cardigan that someone had brought him, and he'd put it on over the gown with the energy of a man reasserting his own decisions as rapidly as possible. He looked at Ethan when Ryan brought him in, and the look had layers, assessment, something like gratitude, and underneath both of those a slightly different thing that Ethan placed after a moment, as the expression of a man who wasn't sure whether to thank someone or apologize to them and had defaulted to neither. You're the one who found my boy, Walter said. I found him, Ethan said. He came the rest of the way himself. Walter looked at Ryan. Ryan was standing near the window with his arms folded. Not hostile, just the default posture of a man who'd spent years in spaces where there wasn't much to lean on. The light came through at an angle that put the left side of his father's face in shadow and the right side in the flat gray of a February morning. Sit down, Walter said. Ryan sat, not on the chair by the bed, on the windowsill, which put him at an angle where he and his father were both looking at a middle point somewhere in the room, rather than directly at each other, which was maybe the only way this started. Ethan took the chair by the door and became as close to invisible as he could manage in a small room. Your mother tells me you've been on the ridge, Walter said. 7 years, Ryan said. 7 years. Walter repeated it not as an accusation, as something he was fitting inside his understanding of things, like a piece that hadn't matched, and now, turned slightly, did. You drove past the house. Yes. Helen thought. Walter stopped, pressed his lips together. She told me a few years ago. She said she thought she saw your truck. I told her she was seeing what she wanted to see. He looked at his hands on the blanket. I was wrong. Ryan said nothing. I was wrong about a lot of things, Walter said. The words came out in the tone of a man who was not accustomed to them and was saying them anyway, which made them heavier than they would have been from someone who said them easily. Dad, let me finish. He said it quietly, but it landed. Ryan closed his mouth. I knew something was wrong when you came back. I knew it in the first week, and I made a choice about how to respond to that. I made it the way I made choices in the Army. I thought the structure would help. I thought if I treated it like a readiness issue, you'd correct it. He paused. I didn't understand that what works for the body doesn't work for... He stopped again, looked at his hands. I didn't have the vocabulary. Neither did I, Ryan said. You tried. Not well. You tried, Walter said again, as if the distinction mattered more to him than Ryan's version of it. I remember. You'd come to dinner and you'd sit down and I'd watch you, and I knew you were carrying something I couldn't see, and every time you tried to tell me about it, He exhaled. I'd say the wrong thing. I knew it was wrong while I was saying it. I just didn't know what the right thing was. Ryan had his arms folded and his jaw set in the way of a man holding something together by the structural tension of his own posture. I should have stayed, Ryan said. I know that. Walking out was... You needed to, Walter said. I've had 7 years to think about it. You needed distance because staying was doing you damage. He stopped. I wish it hadn't had to be from all of us. Ryan looked at his father then, directly, for the first time since sitting down. Something passed between them that didn't need language and probably couldn't have used it. The light, Ryan said. Walter's face changed. I couldn't turn it off. I know. Every night I thought... Walter's voice lost some of its steadiness, not much, enough to hear. I thought if it was dark when you came back, you wouldn't be able to find the door. Stupid. You grew up in that house. You know where the door is. He cleared his throat. But I couldn't turn it off. I saw it, Ryan said, every time I drove out there, from the end of the lane. Walter was quiet. I saw it from the Ridge Road once, Ryan said. I was coming back from Caldwell at night, and the lane opens up for a second before you turn, and I could see it. Just a point of light from that distance. Yellow. He paused. I stopped the truck and looked at it for a while. The room was very quiet. I'm going to stay, Ryan said. Not at the house right away. I need to figure out some things first. But in town. I'll be around, if that's... He stopped, restarted. I'll be around. Walter nodded. Once firm. The nod of a man who had been a sergeant himself once and understood that I'll be around from someone who had been absent for 7 years was not a small thing being offered. Good, Walter said. It came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat again. Your mother will... I know, Ryan said. The two of them sat with that for a moment. Ethan stepped out into the corridor at a look from Ryan, not a dismissive look, a give-us-a-minute look, and stood outside the closed door for a while. Shadow was in the truck in the parking lot. He should walk him. He should find coffee. He should do any of the practical things that existed in the world outside of room 14. He stood in the corridor and did none of them. Dr. Anand came by at 10:30, paused when she saw Ethan, and said, "You're the one who found him in the park last night." "I was there," he said. She gave him the look she probably reserved for people who did significant things and described them minimally. The attending noted a civilian kept him stable and warm until paramedics arrived. The additional exposure would have been serious. She paused. "He's lucky you were in the right place." "I was looking for him," Ethan said. "Even so." She had a chart in her hand and the focused energy of someone with 12 more rooms to visit. "The son, Ryan. He's a veteran?" "2 deployments, Marines." She nodded slowly, some private calculation happening behind her eyes. "I'd like to connect him with the VA liaison before Walter's discharged. Not for Walter, for Ryan. He's been out of the system for a while. There are programs." She paused. "If he's willing." "He might be," Ethan said. "He's in a different place than he was." "People often are," she said, "after a night like that." She started down the corridor and then stopped, turned back. For what it's worth, the cardiac event notwithstanding, the overnight readings on Walter have been the best we've seen since he came in. His blood pressure is down. His rhythm is more regular. She paused. Stress does measurable damage. The opposite is also true. She went. Ethan leaned against the corridor wall and looked at the closed door of room 14. But bummed. Helen arrived at 11 with a canvas bag that contained, as far as Ethan could determine, 3 different food items in containers, a change of clothes for Walter that was already a losing battle given the cardigan, and a thermos of coffee that she pressed on Ethan in a way that brooked no argument. She went into Walter's room. Ryan came out and shut the door behind him with the expression of a man who had correctly identified the moment when a room needed to contain 2 people and not 3. He leaned against the wall across from Ethan, and they stood there in the corridor in the mid-morning quiet. "She cried," Ryan said. "My mother, 2 minutes after she came in. First time I've seen her cry, and—" He shook his head. She apologized for it. "That sounds like her," Ethan said. "I told her she didn't need to apologize." He paused. "She said, 'I know, I just haven't done it in front of you since you were small, and I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it.' And then she cried a little more." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a very specific kind of love, I think. Protecting your kid from your own grief even when your kid is 36 years old." Ethan thought about what kind of love that was. He thought about 13 years of people who didn't come home, and the families who restructured themselves around the absence and kept functioning because what else do you do? "What do you need?" Ethan asked. Ryan looked at him. "I mean practically," Ethan said. "Right now. You've been on that ridge for 7 years. You've got a trailer and a truck and a supply of canned goods and a generator. If you're going to be in town, even temporarily, you need—" "I have money," Ryan said. "Not a lot, but I haven't spent much in 7 years. Veterans benefits, some savings from before." He paused. "I need a place to stay that isn't the trailer. The trailer's an hour from here and my father is in this hospital." "Pine Hollow has 2 motels," Ethan said. "The Lakeview on Route 9 is clean and has weekly rates. I can call ahead if you want." Ryan looked at him with the slight narrowing of a man not sure whether to accept help and aware that his historical response to that question had not served him particularly well. "Yeah," he said. "That'd be good. Thanks. I'll also get you Pete Hollis's direct number if you don't have it." "I have it," Ryan said. He made sure of that. They stood there for a moment. "Cross," Ryan said. "Why do you live here?" "I told you. Fishing, low rent. You told me what your friend told you. I'm asking why you're still here. A man with your background doesn't exactly run out of options." He met Ethan's eyes steadily. "You said you've been someone who orbited something without closing the distance. What are you orbiting?" Ethan looked at the window at the end of the corridor. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the honest answer." Ryan nodded. "Pete would say that's where it starts." "Pete might be right." "Pete's usually right," Ryan said. "He's annoying that way." The VA liaison was a woman named Carolyn Briggs, who operated out of a shared office in the hospital's social services wing and had the organized efficiency of someone managing too many cases without apology and too little funding without complaint. She met with Ryan at 2 in the afternoon, with Ethan down the hall reading a year-old magazine he'd found on a waiting room chair, and Shadow, finally brought in on his service certification, stretched out on the floor beside him. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Ryan came out looking like a man who had been handed a stack of paperwork he should have been handed years ago and was processing the specific variety of emotion that comes with realizing the help existed, was always there, and somehow the path to it had been invisible until now. "There's a residential program," Ryan said, "in Caldwell. 90 days, structured, veteran-specific, peer support, cognitive processing, vocational. The full thing." He paused. "Carolyn says there's a slot available in 3 weeks. There's usually a wait list, but someone dropped out." "Are you going to take it?" Ethan asked. Ryan sat down, looked at his hands. "I've been doing this alone for 7 years because I thought I had to figure it out by myself first, before I could come back." He paused. "I haven't figured it out by myself. 7 years and I'm still in the same place, just geographically closer to home." He looked at Ethan. "So yeah, I'm going to take it." Ethan nodded. "My father's going to hate it," Ryan said. "He's going to say I should be home." "Your father is going to understand that his son is taking care of himself," Ethan said. And if he doesn't understand it immediately, he'll understand it eventually. He's a stubborn man, but he's not a stupid one. 3 days ago, he walked out of a hospital in a snowstorm to find me, Ryan said. So he'll adapt, Ethan said. People who do things like that generally have the capacity. Ryan looked at him. You're good at this, he said. Not the counseling thing, the other thing, the showing up and doing what needs doing without making it about you. Ethan said nothing. I mean it, Ryan said. You didn't have to do any of this. My mother called a stranger she met in a park, and you ran with it. He paused. Whatever you're orbiting, I hope you find the distance. Ethan looked at him. Close the distance, he said. The phrase is close the distance. Ryan looked at him for a moment and almost smiled. Right. Walter was sleeping when Ethan went back in to say goodbye to Helen. She was sitting in the chair beside the bed with her reading glasses on and a paperback in her lap that she wasn't reading any more than Walter had been reading his magazines. She looked up when Ethan came in and carefully closed the book. He sat across from her and kept his voice low. Ryan's meeting with the VA liaison today went well, he said. There's a residential program in Caldwell. 90 days. He's going to take it. Helen looked at her son through the window of the room. Ryan was in the corridor, back visible, on his phone. And something in her face settled further. The specific settling of a person who has been holding tension in their body for so long it had become structural and is now, very carefully, letting some of it go. He's going to be all right, she said. It wasn't a question. I think so, Ethan said. He's in a different place than he was. The shape of the problem is the same, but his relationship to it has changed. He paused. And he has people now. Pete, you. The program will add more. He had people before, she said quietly. He just couldn't reach them. The reaching is easier now, Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment, then, what about you? What about me? You came here 6 months ago, Ryan tells me, or he guessed about the timing. She folded her hands over the closed book. You live alone. You find people, you said, but you don't. She stopped, rearranged. You're good at getting other people unstuck. Are you stuck? Ethan looked at Walter asleep in the bed, the monitoring equipment soft and rhythmic, the cardigan over the hospital gown. Probably, he said, in a different way. You should talk to Pete Hollis, she said. He looked at her. Ryan said the same thing. Ryan is perceptive when he's paying attention, she said. He gets it from me. She held his gaze without apology. You walked through a blizzard for strangers. You found a man who'd been hiding for 7 years. You sat in the snow and held my husband's shoulders so he didn't go into shock. She paused. What do you do for yourself? Walk my dog, he said. She looked at him. I'll think about Pete, he said. She nodded, in the way that meant she'd consider that an acceptable answer for now and revisit it later. It was the same nod Helen Mercer probably deployed at every stage of her life when someone she cared about said something that was in the right direction but not quite far enough. Helen, he looked at her. Why did you stop me in the park that night? You didn't know me. You ran at a stranger. She looked at Walter. Shadow, she said simply. You had a dog that moved like a working dog. The way he walked beside you. Focused. Reading everything. I've been married to a veteran for 50 years. I know what that looks like. She glanced at Ethan. I didn't stop a stranger. I stopped someone who'd learned to notice things. She went back to her not reading. Ethan stood, said he'd check in, meant it. He was at the door when she spoke without looking up. Mr. Cross, the light on Birchwood Lane. He stopped. Ryan said he's going to deal with it when Walter comes home. She turned a page she hadn't been reading. He said he wants to be the one to turn it off. She paused. I told him it doesn't need to be off. It just needs to mean something different. She looked up then, over her reading glasses. Some things don't need to stop. They just need to change what they're for. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment. That's a good way to look at it, he said. She went back to her book. He walked out into the corridor, found Shadow waiting with Ryan, who handed him back the lead with a nod that contained more than the gesture suggested. They walked out through the hospital's glass doors into the cold morning air. into the white and blue of a Montana February that was doing its level best to behave itself, and the truck was where he'd left it, and the road back to Pine Hollow was clear, and the parking lot was ordinary in the way that places are ordinary after something has happened in them that they'll never know about. He opened the truck door. Shadow got in. Ethan sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting it. He thought about what Ryan had said. You're still in the same place, just geographically closer to home. He thought about Pine Hollow, the fishing that was genuinely good, the rent that was genuinely low, the people who genuinely didn't ask about his ribbon rack. He thought about Helen in the park that night, running at a stranger because she'd recognized something in the way his dog walked. He started the truck. On Birchwood Lane, the porch light burned in the daylight, unnecessary and faithful and still there. Bridge, between Part 4 and Part 5. The drive home from the hospital took 11 minutes. Ethan knew this because he'd driven it 4 times in the past week, and the number hadn't changed, which was the kind of small consistency that a certain type of mind found grounding. 11 minutes. Route 9 to Elm Street, left at the hardware store, 3 blocks. The house with the green door that he'd rented because it was available and had a yard large enough for Shadow to move through without feeling confined. He parked and sat in the truck for a moment before going in. The street was quiet. Late afternoon light coming in low and flat off the lake. That specific winter into almost winter quality of light that wasn't quite gold and wasn't quite gray. A neighbor's kid was on a bicycle 2 houses down, working the sidewalk with the focused persistence of someone who had just learned that balance was something the body knew before the mind did. Ethan watched the kid for a moment. Then he went inside. What? He made food he didn't pay attention to. He fed Shadow. He sat at the kitchen table with the notebook he'd been carrying since his force recon days. Actual paper, actual pen, the kind of record-keeping that couldn't be remotely accessed or subpoenaed, and looked at what he'd written over the past week. Names, addresses, notes from conversations. The through line of Ryan Mercer's 7-year absence mapped in the margins like a terrain feature he'd needed to chart before he could navigate it. He looked at it for a long time, and then he closed it. The case, if you could call it that, and he wasn't sure you could because it had never been a case, it had been a man with a dog and a list of 13 names and a porch light that had gotten under his skin, was done. Walter was home on Thursday. Ryan was at the Lakeview, 3 weeks from Cascade Ridge. Helen was sleeping through the night for the first time in 7 years, or so she'd told him on the phone that morning in the careful way she told him things that were personal, as facts, offered without performance. The thing was finished. Ethan looked at the closed notebook. He was aware, with the same methodical awareness he'd applied to every operational debrief he'd ever done, that something had shifted in the 11 minutes between the hospital and this kitchen table. Not dramatically. Nothing about this week had been dramatic, not really. The blizzard, the park, Walter in the snow, Ryan's truck coming through the dark. Those moments had felt large while they were happening, the way moments do when the stakes are real. But the shift he was aware of now was quieter than any of that. He'd been in Pine Hollow for 6 months, moving through it the way he'd moved through every place since he'd separated from the core, observationally, efficiently, without leaving marks. He knew the good coffee on Clement Street and the hardware store owner's name, and the way Route 14 East opened up past the ridge, and he knew these things the way a man knows the terrain of a place he's passing through, not the place he's staying. He wasn't sure, sitting at this table, that the distinction still held. Shadow came and sat beside the chair and put his head on Ethan's knee, not asking for anything, just there. Ethan put his hand on the dog's head. "I don't know what this is," he said aloud, to the dog, and the kitchen, and the particular quality of silence in a house that contained only one person and had for 6 months. "I don't know if this is the place or if I just got here at the right time for something to happen." Shadow looked at him. "Yeah," Ethan said, "that's not a useful distinction." He got up and went to the window. The street outside. The kid on the bicycle gone now, the sidewalk empty. The neighbor's porch light coming on as the afternoon made its final decision toward dark, triggered by a timer or a sensor. Automatic, functional, doing its job without requiring anyone to remember it. He thought about Birchwood Lane. He thought about Walter on the kitchen floor whispering, "Don't turn it off." He thought about Ryan at the end of the lane, sitting in his truck for 45 minutes, watching a yellow light burn in the dark from a distance he'd maintained for 7 years because closing it felt more dangerous than staying in it. He thought about himself, standing in his own kitchen, 6 months into a town he'd arrived at because the fishing was good and the rent was low, telling himself that a while meant something temporary when the evidence, the signed rental paperwork, the truck in the shop, the Thursday drives to Caldwell, Pete Hollis's number in his phone, suggested otherwise. Two men, different shapes, same basic geometry, circling something from a careful distance and calling the distance a plan. He went back to the table, opened the notebook to a clean page, wrote 2 words at the top, Pete Hollis. Looked at them, added a question mark, then crossed it out. Removed the question mark because it was the wrong punctuation. What he meant wasn't a question. What he meant was a direction, which looked like a statement when you wrote it down and felt like a reckoning when you sat with it. He'd spent 13 years in service learning that the most dangerous thing in any operation wasn't the enemy, wasn't the terrain, wasn't the equipment failure you hadn't anticipated. The most dangerous thing was the assumption that you were fine when you weren't, the professional performance of functionality that became so practiced it fooled even the person performing it. He'd been performing it for 3 years. He knew this the way you know things you've been not knowing on purpose, which is suddenly and completely and without the option of going back to not knowing it. Shadow shifted against his leg. The porch light on Birchwood Lane was burning right now, 11 minutes from this table, doing what it had done every night for 7 years. And Ryan was at the Lakeview, and Walter was home, and Helen was, for the first time in 7 years, not sitting on a bench in the dark with a second sandwich she wouldn't eat. The thing that had been broken was in the process of being repaired, not fixed, not restored to factory settings. Repaired, which was the better word, the word that acknowledged the damage while insisting on the continuing. Ethan looked at the 2 words on the page. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He picked it up again, because the second time was always the one that counted, and wrote a text to the number Ryan had sent him. Thursday session. I'll be there. He put the phone face down on the table before Pete could respond, not because he didn't want the response, but because he knew himself well enough to know that if he waited for it, he'd read it 3 times and find a reason to qualify what he'd said. He'd said the thing. The thing was said. Shadow got up and went to the kitchen mat and turned twice and lay down, his hips settling with the careful deliberation of an old dog, managing old damage in the way old damage gets managed, which is not by ignoring it and not by surrendering to it, but by finding the position that makes it livable and staying in it. Ethan watched him. Then he opened the notebook again and looked at the 2 words on the page, and below them he wrote the thing he'd been not writing for 3 years in 6 different towns in 3 different states, which was, I am not fine. I am functional. Those are not the same thing, and it's time to learn the difference. He looked at it, left it there, closed the notebook. Outside, the last of the afternoon light finished its work, and the street went dark. And up and down Elm Street, the porch lights came on one by one, each one doing the simple, faithful thing that porch lights do, marking where home is, holding the dark at the edge, making sure that anyone who needed to find their way back could. He drove past it on his way home, and for the first time since he'd seen it burning in the blizzard on Tuesday night, it looked like something other than a question. It looked just slightly like an answer. He drove past Birchwood Lane 3 more times in the following week without stopping. Not because he needed to. The situation was resolved. Walter was stable. Ryan was in town. Helen had her son back in the way that mattered, which was breathing and present and making decisions that moved toward rather than away. Ethan's part in it was finished. He knew that. He was not someone who confused involvement with ownership, and he'd been careful, consistently, not to become something this family needed to sustain itself. But he drove past anyway. Once on the way to the hardware store for weather stripping. Once on a longer loop he told himself was about Shadow needing the variation in terrain. Once in the early morning when he couldn't sleep and the truck was the warmest place to think. The porch light was still on. He wasn't sure what he was checking for. He wasn't sure he wanted to examine that too closely. Ryan moved into the Lakeview Motel on Monday with a duffel bag and a cardboard box and the stripped-down efficiency of a man who had been living with exactly what he needed for so long, that the concept of moving had become very simple. Room 112, ground floor, facing the parking lot rather than the lake, which he'd specifically requested because the lake view rooms were $30 more per night, and he was budgeting for 90 days at Cascade Ridge, the name of the residential program in Caldwell, and the math was tight. He told Ethan this over coffee at the diner on Route 9 on Tuesday morning, without embarrassment and without self-pity, the way a man reports a logistical constraint. Ethan ordered eggs, Ryan ordered the same. They ate without making it significant. "My father comes home Thursday," Ryan said. "How's he doing?" "Better than he should be, according to Dr. Anand." Ryan turned his fork once on the table. "He's been asking the nursing staff questions about cardiac rehabilitation. They're cautiously encouraged. I think he's already treating it like a field exercise." "That tracks," Ethan said. "He wants me to stay at the house when he comes home, at least for the first week before Cascade Ridge." Ryan looked at his coffee. "I told him I'd come for dinner." "And?" "He said that's a start, which is—" He paused. "That's actually a big thing coming from him. Not pushing, accepting a partial thing instead of holding out for the whole thing." He looked up. "My mother coached him. I know she did. I'm choosing not to point that out." "That's a mature decision," Ethan said. "I've been in a trailer by myself for 7 years," Ryan said. "I've had time to develop some perspective." They ate. A couple came into the diner with a kid who immediately located the highest pitched register of his voice and committed to it. Ryan glanced over, clocked it, returned to his coffee without reaction. The specific, practiced patience of someone who'd learned to operate in discomfort without letting discomfort operate him. "You call Pete yet?" Ethan asked. "Yesterday." Ryan pushed some eggs around. "We talked for an hour. He wants me to come to the group session Thursday afternoon before my father gets home." He paused. "I said I would." "Good." "Stop saying good like you're completing a checklist." Ethan looked at him. "Sorry," Ryan said. "That was—" "No, you're right," Ethan said. "Force of habit, assessment mode." Ryan looked at him steadily. "Are you going to talk to Pete?" Ethan cut his eggs. "Maybe." "My mother told me she told you to." "She did." "She's usually right about these things," Ryan said. "She told me that too," Ethan said. Not in those words. Ryan almost smiled. Not quite. The version of it that lived just beneath the expression and didn't make it to the surface but was visible anyway, if you knew where to look. Walter came home Thursday. The discharge process took 3 hours longer than anticipated because Walter had a series of questions for the nursing staff, the attending physician, Dr. Anand, and a pharmacist who had the misfortune of being in the corridor when Walter decided he needed clarification on the interaction between 2 of his new medications. Dr. Anand handled this with the focused patience of a woman who had assessed Walter Mercer as a high-functioning, difficult patient in the first 48 hours and had adjusted her approach accordingly. Ryan drove his father home in the F-150 because Walter's car was at the house and there was nobody else to do it, and because this was the kind of logistics that simply needed solving, and solving it was easier than making it mean something before it needed to. Helen rode in the back. She told Ethan this later that afternoon on the phone. She'd taken to calling him in the evenings, not long calls. 10 minutes, an update, and a thank you that she delivered as a statement of fact rather than an obligation. He'd started expecting the calls without quite noticing when that had started. "He was quiet the whole drive," she said. "Ryan, he drove and Walter looked out the window, and I sat in the back and didn't say anything because it seemed like the kind of quiet that needed to happen." "What happened when you got home?" "Walter got out of the truck and stood in the yard and looked at the house." A pause. "He stood there for a while. Ryan got out and stood beside him." Another pause. "I went inside and put the kettle on. Some things don't need witnesses." "What were they doing?" Ethan asked. "Could you see?" "From the kitchen window, they were just standing there, not talking, looking at the house. The porch light was on because it's always on." She paused. After a few minutes, Walter put his hand on Ryan's shoulder. Just for a moment. Ryan didn't move. She was quiet. "Then they came inside and Walter told me the kettle was starting to whistle, and I told him I knew that. I could hear it, and he told me I shouldn't leave it too long, and Ryan looked at both of us like he was watching something he'd thought was gone and turned out to just have been waiting. Ethan sat at his kitchen table with his own coffee and said nothing because there was nothing to add to that. "How are you, Mr. Cross?" Helen said. "Ethan," he said. It was the third time he'd said it. "Ethan." She said it like she was trying it out and had decided it fit. "How are you?" "I'm all right," he said. "Are you?" He looked at the window. Pine Hollow outside it, dark now, the lake somewhere beyond the tree line doing whatever the lake did at night in February, which was mostly hold its cold and wait for spring. "I'm working on it," he said. A short silence, then, "That's the right answer," she said. "Good night, Ethan." She hung up. He sat there for a while after. Shadow was on the kitchen mat. On the mat, technically, which was the rule, which both of them understood was a formality at this point, and he looked at Ethan with the patient attention of an old dog who had learned that the humans he was responsible for often needed to sit with something before they could move, and that the right thing to do was stay close while they did it. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I know." He called Pete Hollis on Friday. He didn't rehearse it. He just picked up the phone at 7 in the morning while the coffee was still brewing and called the number Ryan had texted him the day before. And Pete picked up on the second ring because Pete Hollis was, apparently, also a man who was awake before 7. "Cross," Pete said. He'd been given the name in advance, apparently, either by Ryan or by the particular veterans network that seemed to function on a bandwidth Ethan had forgotten he was connected to. "Hollis," Ethan said. "I've been told by 2 separate people to call you." "Only 2? The third is a dog and he doesn't use phones." Pete laughed. "A real one, short and unperformed." "Ryan mentioned the dog. Shadow, right? 11 years old, bad hip, strong opinions." "That's him." "Come to the Thursday session," Pete said. "It's not a commitment. It's just a room with folding chairs and bad coffee and people who've done things they don't know how to talk about yet." "I can talk about things," Ethan said. "Sure you can," Pete said. "That's a different problem. Come anyway." Ethan drank his coffee. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," Pete confirmed. "Bring the dog if he wants to come. Service cert or not, we've never turned away a dog." He hung up before Ethan could think of a response to that, which was probably intentional. The week moved the way weeks move when the worst thing has already happened, and everything after it is the quieter work of figuring out what you build on the ground it left behind. Ryan had dinner at the house on Thursday and again on Saturday. He didn't stay overnight. He came, they ate, he helped Walter with the medication routine that Walter was managing with the grudging compliance of a man who'd decided that if he was going to do this, he was going to do it correctly. And then Ryan drove back to the Lakeview, and Helen cleared the table, and Walter watched the news, and the shape of it was nothing like how it used to be, which was fine, because how it used to be was 7 years ago, and everyone involved was different now, and different wasn't worse. It was just what happened when time passed and things happened in it. Saturday dinner included, for the first time, a conversation about Ryan's deployment that Walter had never fully heard. Not all of it. Not that night. But the beginning of it. Ryan talking about his second tour in a way he'd never talked about it before, with the flatness of someone reporting rather than confessing, and Walter listening in the way Ethan imagined Walter had learned to listen in 7 years of a turned-on porch light and an empty chair at the dinner table, not responding immediately, not reaching for the fixing language, just receiving it. Helen told Ethan about it Sunday morning on the phone. "He talked for almost an hour," she said. "Ryan, Walter didn't say much. I brought coffee and then I went to read in the other room because I felt like I was the third person in a conversation that needed to be between 2. "Did Walter say anything when Ryan was done?" "He said, 'I wish you'd been able to tell me that then.'" She paused. "And Ryan said, 'I couldn't. I didn't have it yet.' And Walter said, 'I know. Neither did I.'" Another pause. Then Walter asked if Ryan wanted more coffee, and Ryan said yes, and that was it. They watched television until 9. Ethan thought about the 2 of them on a couch watching television after an hour of the hardest conversation they'd probably ever had. "That sounds right," he said. It does, Helen agreed. It's very them. Bounce. Cascade Ridge intake was on a Monday in the third week of February. Ryan drove himself, which was the plan, with the understanding that driving yourself to the thing was the first act of choosing it rather than being delivered to it. He stopped at Ethan's place the morning before he left. He knocked, didn't call ahead, just knocked. And Ethan opened the door and Ryan was standing on the porch in his jacket with the truck running at the curb and Shadow behind Ethan doing the head tilt thing he did with new people he was assessing. I'm leaving tomorrow, Ryan said. 90 days. I know, Ethan said. Come in. I can't. He stopped. Came in. He stood in Ethan's kitchen and looked around in the way people look around a space they're seeing for the first time and cataloging, and then he sat at the table and Shadow came and put his chin on Ryan's knee with the presumption of an old dog who'd decided proximity was warranted, and Ryan put a hand on the dog's head and held it there. My father's going to be alone in the mornings, Ryan said. My mother has her errands and her routines, and she's not going to change them, which is correct. But my father is going to be up at 6 and alone until 9 most days, and he's going to be... I'll check on him, Ethan said. Ryan looked at him. I walk Shadow through the park at 7 most mornings, Ethan said. Birchwood Lane is 8 minutes from the park. I can add it to the route. You don't have to... Ryan. Ethan looked at him levelly. I know I don't have to. Ryan looked at his hand on Shadow's head. He's not easy, Ryan said. I noticed that. He'll tell you things are wrong that aren't wrong, and he'll disagree with assessments that are correct, and he'll ask you the same question 3 different ways until he gets the answer he was going to accept in the first place. Sounds like half the officers I served under, Ethan said. Ryan looked at him, and this time the almost smile made it all the way. Don't tell him I said that, Ryan said. Tell him yourself when you get back, Ethan said. Ryan sat with that for a moment. Then he stood, and Shadow released the knee with the dignity of a dog who'd decided the moment was complete. At the door, Ryan stopped. I drove past this house, he said, a few times, when I was doing the Birchwood loops. I used to see your light on. Ethan looked at him. You keep late hours, Ryan said. Sleeping's complicated sometimes, Ethan said. Ryan nodded. Yeah. He put his hand on the doorframe briefly. It gets better, not completely, but better. He said it in the direct way of someone passing on information that had been useful to them. Not comfort. Data. Just so you know. He went down the porch steps and got in the truck and drove. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched the F-150 until it turned the corner, and then he stood there a moment longer in the cold with Shadow pressed against his leg, and the morning was quiet and blue and very still. Spring came to Pine Hollow the way spring comes to northern Montana, not all at once, not as a declaration, but in increments so small that you only noticed them in accumulation. A week of mornings that were cold but not bitter. Ice going soft at the edges of Lake Carver and pulling back from the shore. The birch trees in the park beginning the preliminary work of deciding whether to trust the temperature. Not yet budding, but changed somehow, a different quality to the branches. Walter Mercer's rehabilitation progressed the way Walter did most things, with a kind of combative compliance that managed to be both stubborn and effective. He walked, he took his medications, he attended the cardiac rehabilitation sessions at the Caldwell Medical Center with the minimum possible grace and the maximum possible effort, which Dr. Annan noted in his chart, as patient demonstrates high engagement with structured protocols when framing is adjusted to align with prior military conditioning. Recommend continuing current approach. Ethan added Birchwood Lane to his morning route. He didn't knock the first 2 mornings. He walked past, checked the house, saw the lights on inside and the truck in the yard, and kept moving. On the 3rd morning, Walter was on the porch with a coffee when Ethan came around the bend with Shadow, and the old man looked at him with the expression of someone who had been expecting this and had opinions about the timing. You've been walking past for 2 days, Walter said. Checking the route, Ethan said. Route. Walter said it in the tone he probably used for explanations he found insufficient. Come up. Coffee's fresh. Ethan went up. They sat on the porch in the cold with their coffees, and Shadow examined the yard with professional thoroughness, and the morning did its February thing around them. Walter asked Ethan about his service record with the directness of a man who'd earned the right to ask and didn't see the point in circling it. Ethan answered in the abbreviated version he kept ready. 13 years, Force Recon, Special Operations Attachment, retired at 36 on medical, which was the shoulder, not anything more dramatic than that.